This video was made with support from my patrons, whose names are on screen now. If you want to, you can join them today and even get access to exclusive content. The link to my Patreon is in the description, so check it out if you're interested. Anyway, on with the show. Rally is a discipline like no other. Circuit racing on closed courses is one thing, but barreling down public roads on unpredictable surfaces where almost anything could be around the next corner is something very different. Forget Formula 1. To me, rally drivers are undoubtedly the most skilled drivers on the planet. And when you think about it, that's not too surprising considering the higher stakes. If you go off-piste on a rally stage, you won't find any tech pro barriers to cushion your impact. Merely trees, rocks, and sudden drops. Rally is not for the faint-hearted, even more so than circuit racing. I have always loved rally for as long as I've known about it, and it should come as no surprise that my first taste of rally came from racing games. And when it comes to those, rally tends to feature in one of two ways. Either the entire game is built for and around rally, or rally just happens to be a smaller section of the wider racing appeal. Gran Turismo is by no means a rally game, but has featured rally racing almost from the very beginning. However, the ways in which it has featured has varied massively from title to title, and what we're going to do today is break it all down. So, how has rally racing changed over the course of the series, and which of the games does it the best? From its first appearance in the early days of the franchise, right through to current day. This is a complete retrospective on rally racing in Gran Turismo. Strap in, because this is going to be a wild ride. Well, where else to start than from the beginning? The original Gran Turismo did not feature rally. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that we should gloss over it entirely. Of the 11 circuit locations in GT1, all of them are closed tarmac circuits. However, when we look at the car list, we can see something interesting. The car list of GT1 was, of course, heavily influenced by the Japanese car culture of the time. And in the mid to late 90s, when it came to international rallying, Japanese marques were near unstoppable. Cars from Toyota, Subaru, and Mitsubishi have become cult icons in part due to their rallying credentials, so naturally, these popular models would also be featured in Gran Turismo. And where this gets even more interesting is that most cars in GT1 had the ability to have racing modifications. So when it came to these models, the Subaru Impreza, Mitsubishi Lancer Evo, Toyota Celica GT4, and even the Nissan Pulsar, their racing modifications made them look like their real-life Group A WRC versions. It must be said that this is purely visual, since they don't really drive like rally cars, just four-wheel drive touring cars. But alongside these, there was actually one completely separate rally car included. And here it is, the Subaru Impreza Rally Edition. Unlike the racing mods for the road car Imprezas, this one is based on the real-life 1997 WRC Impreza. It also costs 500,000 credits in-game. But again, don't be fooled by its looks and its name, because this Impreza has almost 600 horsepower. That is close to double what the real-life car has. And once again, it doesn't really drive like a rally car. It's pretty much the Impreza LM edition in disguise. And when it comes to GT1, that's pretty much all there is to say. But even if rally racing didn't appear in the game, it's clear that rally was very much already on their radar, and this would start to pay dividends in Gran Turismo 2. GT2 is where rally became an actual game mode. The game included 6 all-new gravel courses, and the aptly named dirt events, which took place on them. The tracks themselves are fairly varied and about as well designed as the ones on tarmac. When it comes to actually driving, the dirt physics aren't super detailed, similar to the tarmac handling but lower grip. Still, it is detailed enough to allow you to use some rally techniques, like sliding the car through the corners by way of the handbrake or a Scandinavian flick, and feeling the level of grip change as you do so. So traditional rally is point to point. You start in one place and finish in another. But the problem with that when it comes to making racing games is that unlike circuit races, you can't just increase the number of laps to make the event longer. You have to physically make the course longer, which takes up time and resources. For GT2, what they decided to do was create the tracks as continuous circuits, but each race only takes place over one single lap. The exception to this being Pikes Peak, which is based on a small section of the real-life Pikes Peak hill climb course. The event is in essence a time rally, but with a single opponent represented by a ghost car on track. This is an interesting way to do it, sort of a halfway house between a traditional time rally and a closed circuit race. If I'm being honest, I would have preferred them to just do one or the other. I'm not really sure why they went with this solution, as it lacks the appeal of actual rally, where you have a long stage where you're battling against the road as much as the times of your opponents. But at the same time, it's not really a race because you're up against a ghost car which you can't influence in any way. It's a bit odd. But how do the dirt events fit into the main career as a whole? Well, for one, you will find a few dirt tracks used in the license tests. The funny thing about these tests in particular is that compared to the rest, they're surprisingly easy, as in getting gold on your first try without even meaning to. Still, they have to be done before you can enter the dirt events, with a National A license needed for the entry-level races, up to an International B for the harder ones. When it comes to how they're structured, it's fairly similar to most other events in GT2. Each event has 3 races, but at different performance brackets. For dirt events, this just means that your opponent ghost car is different. They can range from lower power front wheel drives, like the Citroen Saxo, up to complete WRC machines like the Mitsubishi Evos. The Pikes Peak hill climb event even has you up against the Suzuki Cultus and Escudo Pikes Peak versions. And that leads us to the cars. Much like everything else about GT2, this has been expanded considerably from GT1. There are plenty of new rally base models, as well as fully fledged rally cars from all over the world. These span the then current WRC era cars, as well as Group A, Group B, and even a bit of older Group 4. There are a few deep cuts also, like the Opel Tigra Ice race car, and of course we can't forget about the Pikes Peak Monsters, displaying the ultimate in dirt racing performance. They're also pretty damn fast on tarmac. Of course, you can use any car you want to for these events, as long as it can be fitted with dirt tyres. But with all of these rally cars, they surely had plenty of choice when it came to deciding the prize cars for these events. Well, here's the thing. None of these dirt races give out prize cars. Once again, that strikes me as a strange decision, given that it goes against the majority of the other events in this game, which seem to constantly throw prize cars at you. In fact, all you get from completing each race is a few thousand credits, so there really isn't much incentive to do these 9 events, totaling 27 races, over the other races in the career. If you watched my retrospective on endurance races in Gran Turismo, you'll know the drill. I'm now going to rate the dirt events in GT2 with a score out of 10. This rating is based on how interesting and expansive the overall experience of them is, and is relative to what I believe was actually possible for the time. I'll give GT2's dirt events a 6 out of 10. The positives are that there is a good selection of tracks and plenty of variety in the cars themselves. The negatives are that they aren't very compelling, either in the gameplay sense or from how they may factor into an overall playthrough. I distinctly get the feeling that they just put dirt racing in as a fun bonus, but that does undermine how much work they put into making the cars and tracks themselves. It just feels like they should have done more with them. If I'm being honest, the dirt events were probably my least favourite part of GT2's career, but I wouldn't say they're bad per se, just kind of meaningless. Still, this was Polyphony's first attempt at rally in the series. With the PlayStation 2 on the horizon, Gran Turismo 3 offered an opportunity to expand and improve. It's safe to say that Rally played a much bigger role in GT3 than it did in GT2. The renamed Rally League is where you'll find them in the main career, but don't think about going in there just yet, because first you'll need to get your Rally license. That's right, instead of tests on gravel circuits being mixed in with the normal licenses, there is now a license specifically for Rally that must be completed before you can even touch the Rally events. These tests are also considerably harder than the ones you'll find in GT2, with test R6 in particular being infamous, especially if you're playing on the NTSC version of the game. But once you've gotten through those trials, you can actually do some racing. Similar to GT2, the gravel courses are all closed circuits, just like the tarmac ones. The main difference though is that you do actually race against another physical car. This is still a 1v1, but now taking place over multiple laps, so in that sense, they're not too different from the regular races. When we talk about the off-road handling, this is where another major step has been made over GT2. I really enjoy the dirt handling in GT3. It's a bit more refined than GT2, and feels a little more distinct from the regular tarmac handling. It is super satisfying to pull off long slides through hairpins or absolutely nail a jump, for example. In terms of realism, of course there's still plenty of room to improve. The cars don't feel very connected to the road, it's more like they float over the top of it. But as I say, I don't feel like this takes away from the overall enjoyment. Much like many other things in GT3, the number of dirt courses was scaled back from GT2 for the sake of higher overall fidelity and quality. There's now 4 in total. All of these are returning tracks from GT2, unless you count Swiss Alps, which is just an evolved form of Smoky Mountain South. But each of these circuits has received a major makeover. Smoky Mountain in particular is the absolute standout for me. It looks brilliant and is plenty of fun to drive. But how does GT3 use these tracks in the events? Well, similar to GT2, each event contains 3 races of increasing difficulty, and also increasing length through adding more laps. This is done for each of the 4 circuits, and doubles when you include the reverse versions also. But there are actually 10 events here. That's because alongside the 4 gravel circuits, you'll also find a special wet surface version of Special Stage Route 5. This introduces Tarmac Rally to the fold, and is a nice inclusion that adds a bit of variety. When it comes to the rally cars, the story is similar to the tracks. There's a handful, most of which being then current WRC cars, with a few exceptions, like the Zara F2 kit car, Group A, Celica and Delta, and of course the mighty Escudo. Again, any car can be used on the dirt tracks as long as it can have dirt tyres fitted. A nice change from GT2 is the fact that prize cars are now given for completing these events. These are exclusively rally cars, but as each race and each event is a different level of difficulty, with the same opponent car getting faster, it means that to fully complete an event, you need to have a pretty fast car. This can then make the previous 2 races fairly trivial once you've upgraded your car, so you will have to deliberately handicap yourself by using slower or unupgraded cars to keep things interesting. This is yet again another intriguing decision. No other events in GT3 have scaling difficulty within their individual races. Of course, the ones in GT2 did, but they gave out prize cars for each individual race, or in the case of the dirt events, none at all. So how you complete the full event didn't really matter. It can all be done separately. With GT3, this is not the case, and kind of leads to a difficulty reset each time you complete an event and then move on to the next one. With all that said, for GT3, I'll give its rally events an 8 out of 10. Positives: it's very enjoyable to drive and feels more refined, and the whole mode is far more fleshed out with much more importance and reason to care. Negatives: the amount of content isn't bad, but quite modest. The inclusion of Pikespeak alone probably added a whole point to GT2's score, so losing it here is a big shame. And despite the clear improvements over GT2, I still think more could have been done here. For example, these events are still 1v1s, but now with a physical opponent. However, in arcade mode, we can see that the wet surface version of Special Stage Route 5 can actually support up to 4 cars with all of their spray being rendered. From this, I don't think it would have been too much of a stretch to do the same in the Rally League events with the dirt courses as well. But maybe having just one opponent was a deliberate decision to prevent these races from getting too overwhelming. Another thing I think they could have done is to have a sort of amateur rally league, which doesn't require the license, but you'd be up against road cars instead. These could range from front-wheel drive hatchbacks to the road-going versions of rally cars. This could set you up nicely for the main rally league and add a bit more variety to the whole rally experience. Regardless, GT3's inclusion of Rally was a clear step up from GT2. It wasn't really Rally, or even Rally Cross, it was like regular circuit racing, but mostly on gravel and with a single opponent. It remained to be seen what Gran Turismo 4 could bring to the table. Another game and another name. What were the dirt events in GT2 and the Rally League in GT3 became the special conditions events in GT4. Really, that could mean anything, like having to play these events whilst wearing a pair of oven mitts, or whilst drinking pure capsaicin. Those would certainly be special conditions. But really, this new name reflects a few things. The first is simply that what Gran Turismo has called Rally isn't actually Rally. Rally is a pretty versatile description that could mean a lot of things, but closed circuit races, simply taking place on a gravel surface, and sometimes even tarmac, doesn't really fit. Where are the pace notes, special stages, or service parks? All of these things which we associate with Rally in the modern era. So to rebrand it in this way makes sense, although the banners for each event still calls them rallies, so whatever. For the sake of simplicity, I will still refer to it occasionally as Rally anyway. The second point is that special conditions is more of a description of the circuits themselves rather than the events. In total, there are 9 special conditions locations, 2 returning from GT3 and 7 being all new. This point alone is already great, since new circuits were missing from GT3's Rally. But when we dive into the circuits themselves, things get even more interesting. 4 of them are gravel, 2 are all new snow and ice courses, and 3 are tarmac street circuits. Yes, tarmac street circuits. So what makes them so different from the other street circuits like New York or Tokyo Route 246? Well, mainly that getting 2 cars side by side in some places at these circuits is literally impossible. In essence, they are rally stages, but made into complete circuits. It's really interesting, and naturally leads to a completely different style of racing. It's still a 1v1 race over multiple laps, but you now have to be more measured about where to pass. And given that contact will result in a 5-second slowdown penalty, you really can't brute force these events. It's more about being precise and patient. Anyway, the special rally license from GT3 has been scrapped, with tests at these circuits being mixed in with the regular licenses, just like in GT2. When it comes to the off-road handling, I'd say that I prefer GT3's. In GT4, the cars have a tendency to understeer at high speeds and have twitchy oversteer at low speeds. They can be a little bit unpredictable. On the whole, they're not that bad. You can still enjoy driving on gravel and now snow, but it takes a bit more time to get used to. On these surfaces, the cars tend to carry more inertia than you might expect. So as you apply the throttle, you end up being pulled towards the outside of the corner faster than you may anticipate. When it comes to the special conditions event structure and how they're integrated into the career mode, I'm a big fan of the way they did this. So each circuit has 3 events total, each containing 2 races, 1 in each direction, with the exception of a wet surface event at Tsukuba. The 3 events range from easy to medium to hard. with you facing a tougher opponent car each time and adding more laps, just like in GT3. The key difference though is the opponent car. On the easy level, these will be older rally base models, like the Renault 5 Turbo or Toyota Celica. Combined with a lack of a rally license, the easy events can be unlocked with just a National A license. This means that these events are a lot more accessible from an early stage in the career compared to GT3. When you consider that there are 33 events in total here, that means there is a lot to sink your teeth into. But one caveat is a usual bugbear when it comes to GT4: balance. Like pretty much all other events, you receive a prize car for completing each of them. But to say that some of these prize cars don't exactly line up with the time investment and challenge of the event would be a massive understatement. Two of the worst examples of this are with the Umbria Rally Easy and Capri Rally Easy, where you can win the Cadillac CN and Toyota RSC Rally Raid car respectively. Both of these are very quick cars, which would most likely be far better than anything you already own, and with the bonus that the RSC can be sold for quite a lot of cash. They are by far the easiest way to break the progression in GT4. But when you consider that the harder events against much faster opponents, like fully fledged rally cars including 500 horsepower Group B monsters, can give out worse prize cars, it is pretty dumb. I'm really not sure why they did this. But still, that doesn't detract from the events themselves. For the most part, I think they're excellent. The only major point of contention is the penalties. They can get frustrating when you, say, hit a wall and lose a bunch of time, and then get a penalty on top of that. Or when the AI breaks way sooner than you're expecting. Also, your opponent can't get penalties, so they have an unfair advantage in that sense. In terms of cars, again this is somewhat similar to GT2, with a great selection of rally cars and base models from all over the world, with a few more classics and rally raid cars sprinkled in as well. Now onto the rating. For GT4's Special Conditions events, Rally, I will give them a 9 out of 10. I adore them. I think the selection of cars and tracks is excellent, with so much variety, and their integration into the career as a whole is really well done, with the exception of a few weird prize car choices that do undermine the progression. The only major negative I would say is the penalty system. I think it's a good idea in concept for these types of events, but the execution isn't the best, and will leave less experienced players more frustrated than challenged. Also, I recognise that this style of racing isn't for everyone. I personally love it. They're basically like Toge battles. One thing you will notice about these new to GT4 circuits is how much narrower they are generally than the previous ones. Look at Chamonix, Grand Canyon, and of course Città d'Aria. You really need to keep focused to stay out of the barriers, and if you're overtaking, then you need to choose your moment carefully. Compare these to, say, Swiss Alps, carried over from GT3 with its massive wide turns. It's not even in the same ballpark. I find the races at the narrower circuits really intense. Even if you have a pace advantage, it's still not a foregone conclusion that you can win. Compared to GT2, where the dirt events were my least favourite part of the career, in GT4, these events are one of my favourite things about it. You just can't find races like these in any other GT game. The tarmac events, at Città d'Aria and Costa di Amalfi in particular, I absolutely adore. Those two tracks are superb, visually, thematically, and of course to drive. They are both easily in my top 10 favourite Gran Turismo original circuits of all time. So, needless to say, Gran Turismo 5 had some big shoes to fill when it came to the rally scene. But on the next generation PlayStation 3 console, who knew what would be possible? Gran Turismo 5 burst onto the scene in November of 2010. As we all know, the lead up to GT5 was a long one, and much was anticipated from the game. When it came to rally, WRC cars were featured quite prominently in the marketing, advertising the fact that the series was represented in the game, as well as NASCAR and various others. So along with the cars, would GT5 feature actual rally stages? Well, no, it was the usual rally circuits. 3 new ones would be introduced, but what about returning circuits? Yeah, there were none of those. This already isn't looking great. Well, let's just see how they integrate rally into the career mode. So let's go over to the career mode, and there's no rally events in the main career mode. Okay, what's going on here? Polyphony had made such a big deal of this in trailers before the game released, proudly showing off their WRC license and model damage for the cars, including even detachable parts, and yet in the game itself, rally barely even existed. In fact, the only event which features the 3 new circuits is the Sebastian Loeb Rally Challenge, a special event where you have to beat a certain lap time at each circuit whilst following a ghost left by the man himself. And I'm not joking here, they designed 3 brand new off-road circuits, and this is almost all they use them for in the entire game. How this decision managed to get through the planning stages, I do not know. It is a complete waste of resources and also pretty misleading. Out of the numerous disappointments that came from GT5, Rally has to be the single biggest one in my opinion. Or at least, that's what I would be saying if it weren't for a little something called Gran Turismo Rally. Gran Turismo Rally is another special event within GT5, unlocking initially at driver level 10 and comes in 3 tiers: beginner, intermediate, and advanced. GT Rally takes advantage of GT5's course maker to randomly generate stages around 3 themes: the Liège theme for the gravel rally, Alaska theme for the snow rally, and Toscana theme for the tarmac rally. It's a pretty neat idea that Dirt 4 would actually use in a different form some 7 years later. And yes, I did say stages, as in point-to-point rally special stages. CourseMaker only allowed players to create complete circuits, yet it did actually have the functionality built into it to make point-to-point stages as well. And when they said rally, this time they actually meant it. You have 3 opponents, and each car starts with a 10-second interval between them. The goal is to simply beat their overall time across the stages. You know, kind of like an actual rally. Added to that, you have a co-driver calling pace notes for each stage. The stages themselves could be up to 5 miles or 8 kilometers in length. The beginner level would have 3 stages per rally, intermediate 5, and advanced 8. For beginner and intermediate, any car can be used as long as it's under the horsepower limit, but for advanced, purpose-built rally cars have to be used. And much like GT4, there are slowdown penalties applied for colliding with things. That said, it is far easier to do that in GT4. With GT Rally, there are other cars on the stage, but you're not racing them as such, just trying to beat their time. Also, the stages generated have a habit of being very wide, much wider than most real rally stages, due to the fact that CourseMaker is designed primarily to create normal closed circuits. Another quirk of the CourseMaker in these stages is how they can often be divided into clear sections. That's because that's how the CourseMaker works. It generates each track in sections, and then certain things can be modified within each section, like road width, corner sharpness, and most obviously, complexity. The limitations of the CourseMaker also manifest in the detail of the stages. They're all pretty bland. There isn't much trackside detail, and they can start to feel a bit samey after a while. What does help with that though is that time and weather on these rallies is variable, another new feature introduced in GT5. So that's something. You do still earn prize cars from these rallies, but only after clearing all 3 rallies in each tier. Of course you do earn money as well, but like the other special events, this is a one-time payout. Once you've earned the rewards, you can't win them again, which does sadly limit its replay value. When it comes to cars, GT5 carries over the ones from GT4, but with the 2008 WRC cars included as well. In terms of a rating, I'll give the rally in GT5 a 7 out of 10. I'm probably a bit biased here because I really like actual rally, and seeing it in games, especially ones that aren't proper rally games, is really cool. That feeling of contesting a real rally is one of the biggest strengths here, as well as employing the course maker to generate the stages, which was a pretty novel and creative idea. Sadly, the course maker isn't advanced enough to make really interesting stages, so the experience can get a bit dull. And although there is a good few hours of content in this mode, I get the feeling that a lot more could have been done with it. I believe that as it was only created as a fun special event, they didn't really try to push the envelope with what was really possible. But there is some cut content in GT5 that suggests more was planned, such as many more types of pace note calls and some unused features in the course maker, like grass verges and puddles of water. They also could have implemented new features, like more detailed mechanical damage and service parks where you're able to repair your car, as well as having far more opponents for each rally, of course. To be honest, it has been a while since I've revisited Gran Turismo Rally, or GT5 in general, but I do have fond memories of it, and it still represented something entirely new and interesting in the franchise at the time. But this now left the series at a crossroad. How would they handle Rally in their next title? Well, fortunately, we wouldn't have to wait too long to find out. Okay, let's not beat around the bush this time. Rally is barely a part of Gran Turismo 6. And no, I'm not going to pull the same trick as with GT5 and say, except for this. I'm being 100% serious. And if you've ever played GT6, then you should know this very well. Yes, despite having the most content of any Gran Turismo game, over 1,200 cars and 40 plus track locations with countless variations, Rally has been almost entirely forgotten. In terms of the tracks, we still only have the same 3 as in GT5, Toscana, Eiger Nordwand, and Chamonix. And when it comes to the cars, these are again mostly just carryovers from GT5, which themselves were mostly carryovers from GT4. To be fair, there are a few new inclusions, like the Audi Quattro S1 in both Group B and Pikes Peak versions, as well as the Monster Sport Suzuki SX4 Pikes Peak, the successor to the legendary Escudo. There's also the E-Runner Pikes Peak Special, which is an electric hill climb car again built by Monster Sport. If you can look past the lower fidelity of the majority of the rally cars in GT6, this all adds up to a pretty expansive roster. The only things missing were the then current WRC cars, as this was the point wherein that license became exclusive to the WRC games. But of course, it's not just about having these cars in the game, it's what you can do with them that matters. When it comes to the main career, there is actually one event taking place on dirt called the Dirt Trials, which is at least an improvement on GT5. But dispel any notion you may have that this event is anything like the ones from the previous games, because it really isn't. It follows the same formula as pretty much all of the other races in GT6. You have a long line of opponent cars strung out, and you pass them one by one. The only difference is that you're on gravel and against rally cars. There's nothing more to it than that. There is actually one other event in the main career that features rally cars, and that is the Gornergrat League. This event takes place across 3 variations of the new Matterhorn location, and is much of the same in overall format. The interesting thing here is the track. The Matterhorn being a fairly narrow circuit with some serious elevation changes. I imagine that if something like it were in GT4, it would be considered a special condition circuit. However, in GT6, it's just a normal track that features in various other races throughout the main career. Interestingly, some years later, it was discovered that Matterhorn was originally planned for GT5 as a dirt course instead. It seemed to be a decent way into development with its own unique layout and everything before being scrapped, and then later morphed into the version we all know for GT6. A very unfinished version is actually playable in a prototype build of GT5, but it features only the low detail road and scenery. However, there are a few preview images of the circuit in a more completed state that give us a better impression of what it actually looked like. Why this version never made it in is unknown. maybe they thought it might be too similar to Eigen Nordwand, as another dirt circuit based in the Swiss Alps, but who knows for sure. So when it comes to Rally in GT6, that's about it. Gran Turismo Rally from GT5 sadly didn't return in any form, but there are a couple of special events in GT6 that I need to mention. The first centres around the Goodwood Hill Climb, which became the first point-to-point track in the series since Pikes Peak all the way back in GT2. Unless you consider the Las Vegas drag strip from GT4, which I don't. This track hosts the Goodwood Festival of Speed special event, which, just like its real inspiration, takes the form of a series of time trials with various cars. This isn't really Rally, since it's just one very short stage and there are no opponents, but I still thought it was worth mentioning. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the Sierra Time Rally. This special event was added in an update. The basic premise is to complete one full lap of the then new Circuito della Sierra track whilst overtaking slower cars and passing through checkpoints to add time and increase your score. It's pretty fun, and the circuit itself is awesome. But when we talk about Rally and Gran Turismo, this is not what anyone means. It's something entirely different. So I won't be talking about these time rally events in either of the later games. The rating I'll give for Rally in GT6 is 3 out of 10. The positives: lots of rally cars to drive and mess around with, either on your own or online back in the day. The negatives: basically everything else. There is only one rally event, maybe two at a push, in the main career, and instead of emphasizing the differences and making Rally a more unique game mode like they did in GT5, they just homogenized it to the rest of the game. There is hardly anything here, and what is here just simply isn't interesting. It was a common theme with GT6 that despite having more content than any other GT game in terms of cars and tracks, they just didn't seem motivated to do anything interesting with it. This is true for Rally in the most extreme way. The only upside being that GT6 works as a great sandbox to let the player create their own fun. Frankly, it only feels like Rally is included in any form in GT6 because they already had the content from the past games and there was no reason to throw it all away. Any amount that it featured in the single player just felt like a token gesture towards the people who enjoyed that content, rather than as any sort of meaningful addition to the game. So this is where the retrospective becomes a bit difficult for me to make. After GT6, we have GT Sport, and then after that, GT7. The problem is that when it comes to Rally in both GT Sport and GT7, there isn't much to it, and more importantly, their execution of it is almost identical. So, what I'm going to do is talk about them together as a sort of Rally in current Gran Turismo section. Okay, let's do this. With the release of GT Sport in late 2017 came a complete reset in terms of content, and for Rally, this was no different. All of the cars and tracks from the previous games were gone, and in their place was a slew of new additions. There were 3 all-new gravel circuits and 9 completely original rally cars. Starting with GT Sport, they introduced the group system, in which cars of similar performance would all be grouped together and then balance of performance used to ensure they were all capable of similar lap times. In theory anyway. For rally cars, this took the form of the aptly named Group B. Although these cars seem to resemble rally cross cars more than pure rally cars, with the exception being the Peugeot RCZ, which is clearly done up to look like a Pikes Peak special, with its massive front overhang and rear wing. Beyond these, there was actually a 10th rally car in Group B, the Audi Quattro S1, which was the only returning rally car from GT6. Ironically though, this Quattro is not the Group B version, but instead the Pikes Peak one. It was also a complete outlier in the game as a whole, as at launch it was by far the oldest car in GT Sport, with the next oldest one being from 2009. How Rally features in both GT Sport and GT7 is pretty simple. They just use it like they do with any other pieces of content. The rally cars and dirt tracks occasionally feature in license tests/driving school, mission events, and of course, the main single-player races. Ultimately, they've taken what they did with the dirt trials in GT6 and have expanded that further. Rally races in current Gran Turismo are no different than the standard tarmac circuit races. Gone are the days of rally being its own unique game mode. The cars and tracks are fine. Most of the cars are similar, so it doesn't really matter which one you choose, and the tracks are fairly standard. Fisherman's Ranch is the only one of the three that I find particularly memorable. Of course, more content has been added over time. If we talk about the cars, GT7 introduced the first proper Group B car into Group B, in the form of the Peugeot 205 T16 Evo 2. Since then, more have been added, including even the Escudo Pikes Peak making its return. Although, since it's much faster than the other cars in Group B, it exists outside of the group structure kind of on its own. When it comes to the tracks, we've also seen some new faces, like the Rallycross variation of Catalunya as a very unexpected inclusion. Although the rally in current Gran Turismo has always been closer to Rallycross, there are still some clear separators. Most races feature drawn-out rolling starts, which we're all very used to by now, but Catalunya is the exception given that it is an actual Rallycross circuit, so it has to be a grid start. But there are no Joker laps, which does remove the element of strategy. Just last month, we received another circuit in the form of Lake Louise, which returns snow racing to the series. Despite it being absent from GT Sport, snow tyres were always in that game, but just made unusable. Whilst the new additions are welcome, the biggest sore spot for players has always been Pikes Peak. Yes, the legendary hill climb course that last featured in GT2, albeit only as a small section and not the full thing. It is very well known by now that Gran Turismo holds the exclusive license to the track and have done for a number of years, so why is it still yet to return? The GT2 version of the track was actually discovered hidden in GT5. Gran Turismo also sponsors the real-life event, and Pikes Peak are even given a special thanks in the credits of GT Sport. Not to mention the various cars which have competed there that have featured in the series since. All of the signs point towards Pikes Peak being included, but that's still yet to happen. The strongest hint we do have for its return actually comes from a teaser image for the Suzuki Vision GT car from May 2022. This image uses a Pikes Peak Scapes location, yet neither the track nor the Scapes have been added since. Frankly, if they do give us just the Scapes in a future update, that would be the ultimate insult. If we talk about handling on gravel and snow, this has generally been a lower grip variation on the tarmac handling, usually feeling less responsive and also less detailed. It's perfectly fine, but clearly a step below more dedicated rally games. At launch, the physics when going over jumps and uneven surfaces in GT7 was severely exaggerated, leading to some pretty ridiculous moments. Thankfully, this has been rectified in the updates. So, considering everything, I'll give the rally within both GT Sport and GT7 a combined 4 out of 10. That may seem a bit harsh in comparison to GT6, but that is an accurate reflection of my feelings with it. If there's one word to express how I feel about rally in current Gran Turismo, it would be uninspired. I can't even bring myself to say that it's bad. The physics are fine. The tracks are fine. The cars are maybe a bit lacking in variety, hence why it gets a 4 and not a 5, but still it could be worse, and they continue to expand this side of the game in updates. The biggest positive is that the content is actually used fairly often in different events and scenarios. It's not been completely mothballed like GT6, but at the same time, it's become so meaningless. There's nothing unique about it. All that rally now means in Gran Turismo is rally-inspired cars on off-road circuits. That's it. Every structural and gameplay aspect that made rally special in the previous games has been stripped away until we're left with this. can you imagine someone saying that they really love Rally in GT7? I'm sure someone does, but I think it's far more likely to find people who play the game regularly and forget that Rally is even a part of it. So that's how each Gran Turismo's version of Rally stacks up, in my opinion. Again, these ratings are relative to what I think was actually possible for each game to do when they came out, based on the cumulative knowledge and technical advancement. I said it was going to be a wild ride, and that proved to be true. The spread in these ratings is notably higher than in my endurance racing retrospective, and I think that reflects just how much the importance of Rally has shifted during the course of the series. You could say that Rally in Gran Turismo means everything, but also nothing. I've done a fair few retrospectives on features and themes within Gran Turismo over the course of this year, and if there's one conclusion that I always seem to come to by the end of each video, is that these things which made Gran Turismo so special and enjoyable for people in those previous games has gradually been forgotten as the series has gone on. And not only that, but nothing new has come in to really replace these ideas either. I think that when people talk about the decline of Gran Turismo, it's not about the games being lower quality or just simply having less content. It's this idea of what Gran Turismo actually means to people not being reflected in the newer games. Rally was a completely superfluous addition to Gran Turismo. They didn't need to do it. Forza Motorsport has never featured Rally, beyond a couple of cars and narrower circuits, but not as an actual game mode. Yet with GT2, they added it anyway because they cared to do that. And I think this obvious passion for Rally rubbed off on many of the people who played those older games and did the Rally events. It was all about how they made it interesting, both from a gameplay perspective and structurally within the game. In modern Gran Turismo, Rally is simply a tick in the box. There's no greater meaning or purpose to have it in the game beyond just having it. Maybe there are people that still love Rally within Polyphony, but that just doesn't seem to come through in these games anymore. Frankly, it's at the point now where we have to question why Rally is still even in Gran Turismo at all. It has always been secondary to the normal racing in these games, in terms of how much time, effort, and importance is placed on it when the game is being created. But in the past games, this wasn't really an issue, because as long as the content was there, they gave people a reason to play it, and it was actually worthwhile to engage with, then it didn't need to be this incredible experience that would make you stop everything to go and have. It just needed purpose. The problem is that with current Gran Turismo, the priorities have shifted considerably. Making the cars and tracks takes far longer than it did in the PS2 days, meaning that any new inclusion has to be worthwhile to some degree. When GT Sport launched, there were only 17 circuit locations, and of those, 3 of them were on gravel. That represented 18% of the total locations. And bear in mind, this was GT Sport, where competitive online racing was king. And needless to say, this simplified rally/rallycross hybrid with mostly made up cars didn't really appeal to the esports crowd. It barely ever featured in sport mode, and one of the only times they tried it at a live event, it was just a complete mess. So if it isn't included for the unique single-player experience it can offer, and there's no real interest from the hardcore online racing perspective, then what exactly is it for? To me, it just seems like it's there so Gran Turismo can keep its title as the jack-of-all-trades racing game. And if that is all it's there to do, then I'd argue the franchise would be better off without it. The Rally in current-day GT doesn't achieve anything, and that's so frustrating because we know that so much more is possible. When I talked about endurance racing, I had a very clear idea of what I believe they should be doing with it, based on what they've done in the past, the new elements that could be incorporated, and how that all points towards an obvious natural progression. With Rally, the situation is less clear-cut. There are many different routes they could go down. The simplest would be to just do what they did in the past and have Rally be its own sort of game mode, but still tangentially connected to the main single player campaign. This is what they did in GT2, 3, and 4. I think GT3's rendition is probably the most rounded in terms of feeling like its own slice of the game. Although, I think the subtle changes they made for GT4, making Rally more accessible from early on, and having narrower courses so it feels more like a battle, made the whole experience more unique. Then consider that GT3 only had 4 off-road circuits and fleshed that out into an entire league and portion of the game, whereas GT7 now has 5 and yet doesn't come anywhere close to what even GT3 did. And when you think about the limitations of those older games, in a similar way to the endurance races, so much more is possible in current day should they wish to go down that route again. But that's just one possible option. Remember Gran Turismo Rally from GT5? Who's to say that they can't do that again? Dirt 4 proved that procedurally generated stages can be far better than the mostly lifeless ones in GT5. And with the advancement in the technology since then, it can only get even better. Not to mention all of the new elements they could incorporate from real rallying to add even more depth to the experience. GT Sport featured the Northern Isle Festival, which was a series of mission challenges taking place on the infield of the oval circuit. Basically, they were like bite-sized super special stages. Who's to say that they can't include more of these within this mode as well? Of course, they would be wise not to lean into the realism aspect too much, because if that's the angle they take, there's no way they could hold a candle to the dedicated rally sims. What they would need to do is to emphasize those features for their gameplay value and not simply just their realism. But this is polyphony we're talking about, so maybe that's a long shot. Anyway, one advantage they would have over the pure rally titles is the rest of the game, and how the rally portion could factor into a playthrough. I'm talking about the types of cars, specialized upgrades, rewards, etc., and how this all feeds into the overall gameplay loop. This is what made Rally in the past GTs so rewarding, even if the actual gameplay was never as deep as the games that just focused on Rally. And what about the Rallycross angle? GT7 added an actual Rallycross circuit, so why not lean into that more with a proper Rallycross game mode featuring the rules and regulations that come with the discipline? This is what I mean when I say there are so many different angles they could take. And they don't have to just restrict themselves to one of these. They could feature Rally in multiple different forms if they really wanted to. Some have suggested that Gran Turismo should make a Rally spin-off game, because doing so would allow them more freedom to fully flesh it out. But to me, the charm of Rally in Gran Turismo is exactly that, being part of Gran Turismo. Sure, on its own they could make it feel more realistic and authentic, but then it would just be another Rally game. Making Rally a part of the wider Gran Turismo experience is something truly unique to Gran Turismo, and this is partly why many of us have such fond memories of it from those older games. But the problem with all of these suggestions is, do Polyphony want to do any of this? Because based on how Rally within Gran Turismo has been treated for the past decade, I strongly suspect that they don't. They're content with how things are, and if so, then there isn't much hope. When you think about it, Rally is a pretty niche discipline, so honestly, the fact that it managed to be put in front of so many people thanks to these games is something we can't take for granted, because we can now see just how different it could have been. Rally has never been the most polished or complete part of these games, but thanks to Polyphony's previous dedication, it kept coming back, game after game. Whenever anyone mentions Gran Turismo, Rally is unlikely to be one of the first things that come to mind. But for those of us who played those games when it was at its peak, had those experiences, and made those memories, Rally and Gran Turismo will always have a place in our hearts.